She woke up that morning feeling the same way she always did, quiet, a little restless, and unsure what the day might bring. She went through her usual routine, a cup of coffee, the hum of the morning news in the background, and the slow steps to the small kitchen where sunlight poured softly through the window. The world outside moved quickly, people rushing to work, to errands, to lives that seemed so full, while she felt a gentle emptiness she could not name. Life was comfortable in its routines, but there was a quiet ache she had learned to live with, a longing for something more, something that mattered in a way she could not quite define. She decided to take a walk before work, a habit she had developed to clear her mind. The streets were already alive with movement, mail carriers pushing carts, shopkeepers arranging their displays, children chasing each other on the sidewalk. She walked slowly, noticing small details, the way the sunlight hit the leaves on the trees, the soft chatter of neighbors, the distant bark of a dog. It was peaceful, and yet there was a part of her that yearned for connection beyond the polite nods and smiles exchanged with strangers. As she turned a corner near a small park, she noticed a man sitting alone on a bench. At first she almost walked past without a second thought, but something made her pause. He looked weary, his shoulders slumped, his face carrying a weight that seemed far too heavy for one person to bear. His eyes were fixed on the ground, lost in thought, but when he shifted slightly, she saw a flicker of pain there, a depth that drew her attention despite herself. She hesitated, feeling that familiar uncertainty in her chest. What could she say? What could she do? She wasn't used to stepping into the lives of strangers, especially when they seemed burdened with troubles she could not begin to understand. But she felt a pull, a quiet urging that made her stop a few steps away and watch him for a moment. He did not notice her at first, completely absorbed in his own world, tracing invisible patterns with the tip of his shoe against the pavement. After a few seconds, she decided to sit on the empty space beside him. She did not speak immediately, simply sharing the bench, giving him the choice to acknowledge her presence or remain in his solitude. The silence between them was not uncomfortable but heavy, like a soft cloud that needed to be understood before it could lift. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet and tentative, almost as if he was surprised to hear himself talk. "It's been a long time," he said, eyes still downcast. She turned to him slightly, offering a gentle smile. "Sometimes the days feel longer than they should," she said softly. Her words were simple, but they carried a warmth that she hoped he could sense. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Yeah," he said. "It's hard to keep going when it feels like everything is falling apart." Something about his honesty struck her. She had known pain in her own life, small fractures that left their marks over time, moments when she had felt lost and unseen. And here was someone else, a stranger, carrying a weight she could recognize even if she could not name it fully. "I understand," she said, surprising herself with the truth in her voice. "Not exactly what you're going through, but I know what it's like to feel like the world is too heavy." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment she saw a flicker of hope, a spark that suggested he had not been seen or heard in a long time. He shifted slightly, the first small movement that indicated he might want to talk. She waited patiently, letting the quiet stretch between them. There was no rush, no pressure to fill the space with conversation that did not matter. Just being present, simply noticing him, she realized, could be enough. Sometimes, she thought, just letting someone know they are seen can start a change that words cannot force. He finally began to share, in small, halting sentences, a story of loss and struggle. He spoke of moments when he felt invisible, days when he could not find a reason to get out of bed, nights filled with restless thoughts that refused to let him rest. He did not speak of dramatic events, but of small, persistent disappointments that piled up over time, the quiet erosion of hope that can happen in anyone's life. She listened without interrupting, allowing him to speak at his own pace. Her own thoughts and fears were quiet now, replaced by a focus on him, on the humanity in his struggle. She realized that in listening she was not only offering comfort, but also learning to connect with a part of herself that had been dormant. Compassion, she understood, was not just for others. It was a reflection of the strength she had yet to recognize in herself. When he paused, uncertain whether to continue, she offered a simple comment. "I'm glad you told me. It matters that you shared this." He gave a small, almost shy smile. "Most people don't care," he said softly. They see you maybe, but they don't really notice. She nodded, her heart tightening at the truth in his words. I notice, she said, and I want to. For the next hour they sat together, speaking in turns, sometimes in silence, sometimes sharing fragments of their lives. She learned that his struggles were not unique, but the way he carried them made them feel insurmountable. She shared little of her own story, only enough to let him know he was not alone. That connection could exist even between strangers. By the time she realized how late it had become, the sun had shifted lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park. She stood brushing the dust from her pants, feeling a strange mix of heaviness and warmth in her chest. He remained seated, looking at her with a quiet gratitude that did not need words. I should go, she said softly. But I'll be back, if you want to talk again. He nodded, and this time the nod held more than hesitation, it held hope. I'd like that, he said. As she walked away, she felt a shift inside herself, subtle but undeniable. Something had awakened. A sense of purpose she had not realized was waiting for her. The connection they had shared, brief as it might have been, left her thinking about the power of being present, the courage it took to notice another person's pain, and the strength required to offer even a small measure of comfort. She returned home that evening with her mind buzzing, replaying moments from their conversation, remembering the weight in his eyes and the tentative hope in his voice. She realized that life, in its routines and quiet days, often left little room for noticing the depth of others' struggles. And yet she also realized that noticing, truly noticing, could change everything, not just for the person suffering, but for the one who cares enough to step forward. That night, she could not sleep easily, but it was not restlessness or worry that kept her awake. It was the stirring of something new, a purpose, a desire to connect, a willingness to face her own fears of inadequacy and step into the discomfort of helping another human being. She understood in that quiet hour before dawn that this small encounter could become a turning point, a beginning of a journey neither of them could yet see in full. And so, as the city slept, she allowed herself to hope, to feel the small spark of courage that comes from reaching out to someone else. She did not know what the future held, nor the challenges that would come with helping a wounded soul. But she knew with a clarity she had never felt before that this moment mattered, that simply noticing, simply being present, had already begun to shift something inside her, and that, maybe, just maybe, it could begin to shift something inside him too. After that first encounter in the park, she could not stop thinking about him. His quiet pain, the way he carried the weight of his struggles, stayed in her mind, following her through her daily routines. She went to work, answered emails, made small talk with colleagues, and completed tasks with her usual efficiency. Yet her thoughts kept drifting back to him, to the image of his slumped shoulders and the heaviness in his eyes. She realized that she wanted to help, not just in a fleeting way, but in a way that could actually make a difference. The next day she returned to the same bench, uncertain if he would be there. The park was alive with familiar sounds, the laughter of children, the chatter of people walking dogs, the rhythmic footsteps of joggers, but she walked with a sense of purpose, her eyes scanning for the familiar figure. And there he was, sitting quietly, staring at the ground as though trying to make sense of the world in the patterns of cracks on the pavement. She approached slowly, giving him a gentle smile. "Good morning," she said softly, sitting beside him. He looked up briefly, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Morning," he said, his voice hesitant but not cold. For a few moments, neither spoke. They just shared the space, two lives intersecting in the quiet rhythm of the park. Then slowly he began to open up. He spoke about his struggles more clearly this time, sharing details he had not revealed before, the disappointment of missed opportunities, the loneliness that clung to him like a shadow, the feeling that no matter what he did, he could not escape the weight of his past. She listened without judgment, allowing him to pour out his fears and frustrations. Her presence was steady, a calm that contrasted with the storm he carried inside. She realized that in order to help him, she first had to be patient, to resist the urge to fix everything immediately. Healing, she knew, could not be forced. It had to grow slowly, like a plant reaching for sunlight after a long winter. As he spoke, she noticed small details. The way his hands trembled slightly when he gestured, the quick intake of breath before he shared something particularly painful, the way his eyes darted around as if checking for escape routes even in the middle of a public park. These details told her that his struggle was not just emotional, but physical, rooted deep in his body as well as his mind. She decided to share a little of her own story, not to overshadow his pain, but to let him know he was not alone. She spoke quietly about times she had felt lost, moments when fear and doubt had held her back, the nights she had spent staring at the ceiling wondering if she could ever find her place in the world. Her words were simple, but they carried sincerity. He listened, and she could see a shift in him, small but significant. His shoulders relaxed slightly. The tension in his face softened, and for the first time he allowed a small tentative smile to surface. I didn't expect anyone to understand," he said softly. "I may not understand everything," she replied, "but I want to. And I can listen. Sometimes that's enough to start." They continued to meet over the next several days, sometimes in the park, sometimes at a small cafe nearby. Each encounter brought them closer, though the path was not smooth. There were moments when he would retreat into silence, when the weight of his thoughts seemed too heavy even for their quiet conversations. She learned not to push him, understanding that trust could not be rushed. One afternoon he shared a memory that had haunted him for years, a loss that had never been spoken of to anyone. His voice shook as he recounted the details, and for a moment, it felt as if the world had narrowed down to the two of them, the hum of the city fading into the background. She reached out, placing a hand lightly on his arm, a gesture of support that did not require words. "It's okay to feel this," she said softly. "It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." He looked at her, and for the first time he did not look away. There was a flicker of trust, a recognition that she was not there to judge, not there to fix him, but simply to stand beside him. As their meetings continued, she began to notice changes in herself as well. Helping him brought out a resilience she had not fully acknowledged before. She had always thought of herself as capable, but now she realized that true strength was not in handling her own life perfectly, but in stepping into the lives of others with compassion and courage, even when it was uncomfortable. She discovered patience she had not known she possessed, empathy that deepened with each story shared, and a quiet confidence that came from being present in someone else's pain, without being overwhelmed by it. There were setbacks, of course. Some days he would not show up. Some days he would withdraw after sharing a little, his walls rising again as quickly as they fell. She felt moments of frustration and doubt, questioning whether she could truly help, whether her efforts were making any difference at all. But each time she reminded herself that progress was not measured in grand gestures, but in small steps, the hesitant smile, the willingness to speak, the moments of trust that grew over time. One rainy afternoon, she found him sitting on the same bench, drenched from the sudden downpour. She hurried over, offering him her umbrella and a warm smile. "You don't have to face this alone," she said. He accepted the umbrella silently, a quiet gratitude in his eyes. For the first time, she noticed a softness in his demeanor, a willingness to lean on someone else without feeling ashamed. It was a small victory, but in her heart it felt monumental. She realized that helping him was not about fixing his problems. It was about creating a space where he could be seen, heard, and understood. It was about walking beside him through the difficult moments, offering a steady presence when the world around him felt chaotic and unkind. And in doing so, she found that her own life was changing too, her heart opening in ways she had not anticipated, her sense of purpose growing with each shared conversation, each moment of connection. As weeks passed, their relationship deepened. He began to open up more consistently, sharing hopes and fears, past regrets and dreams that had been buried under layers of doubt. She encouraged him gently, asking questions that helped him reflect on his own strengths, celebrating small achievements and reminding him of the resilience he already possessed. There were nights when she lay awake thinking about him, wondering how he was coping, hoping that her presence had made even a small difference. She recognized that this concern was not just about helping someone else. It was also about discovering the strength within herself, the courage to face uncomfortable truths, and the ability to care deeply without losing herself in the process. One evening, as they sat together on the bench, he turned to her with a hesitant smile. "I don't know how to say this," he said, "but I feel like I can start again, like maybe it's not too late." She felt a warmth spread through her chest. "It's never too late," she said. "You've been carrying so much for so long. Starting again is brave. And you're not alone." In that moment, she realized that the journey they were on together was not just about helping him heal. It was about discovering the quiet strength that exists when two people trust each other enough to be vulnerable, about the courage it takes to face pain head-on, and about the way human connection can illuminate paths that were once hidden in darkness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the park, she felt a sense of hope she had not known in a long time. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt and struggle, but she also knew that they could face them together. And in helping him take these first steps toward healing, she found a reflection of her own strength, a reminder that the act of caring can transform not only the one who receives it, but also the one who gives it. For the first time in a long while, she felt that sense of purpose she had been searching for, not in her routine, not in her work, not in fleeting distractions, but in the simple, profound act of being present for someone else. And as they parted that evening, promising to meet again, she walked home with a quiet determination, ready to face the challenges ahead with compassion, patience, and a newfound courage that had been awakened through helping a wounded soul. Days turned into weeks, and their meetings became a quiet ritual that neither of them wanted to break. She looked forward to seeing him, to the way he would sit on the same bench, sometimes staring at the sky, sometimes fidgeting with his hands, always carrying a mix of hesitation and hope. But life, as it often does, has a way of testing the things we hold dear. It happened on a gray afternoon, the kind of day when clouds cover the sun and the air feels heavy. She arrived at the park, expecting to find him waiting as usual, but the bench was empty. She waited, her eyes scanning the familiar path, the familiar spots where he might appear, but there was no sign of him. A small knot of worry formed in her chest. It was unlike him to miss a meeting. They had both committed to these conversations, to this fragile bridge of trust. As she walked the paths of the park, her worry grew. She wondered if something had happened, if he had retreated into the darkness of his thoughts and had not found the courage to step out. She tried calling him, but there was no answer. The silence on the other end of the line felt heavy, almost suffocating. Finally, she found him at the edge of the park, sitting on a low stone wall, his hands clasped tightly together, his face hidden in his hair. He looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of his struggles had grown heavier overnight. She approached slowly, unsure of what words could reach him, but knowing that she had to try. "Hey," she said softly, sitting beside him. He did not respond at first, his shoulders hunched in a protective cocoon. "I was worried about you," she continued. "Are you okay?" He shook his head slowly, the first tear escaping down his cheek. I can't do this," he whispered, his voice breaking. Everything keeps falling apart." For a moment she said nothing, giving him space to release the storm he had been holding inside. Then gently she put her hand on his shoulder. "It's okay to feel like this," she said. "You're not weak for feeling overwhelmed. You're human, and you don't have to face it alone." He looked at her then, eyes glistening with tears, and for the first time, she saw the depth of his despair. It was raw, unfiltered, and it shook something inside her. She realized that helping him meant more than listening. It meant standing with him in the moments when life felt unbearable, holding space for his pain without judgment. He began to speak, words tumbling out in a rush. He shared a fear he had never spoken aloud, a memory he had buried deep within himself, a regret that had haunted him for years. His voice shook, and she could see the physical toll of his emotions, the tightness in his chest, the quiver of his lips, the trembling of his hands. She listened, letting him pour out the weight he had carried for so long. And as he spoke, she realized that her own fears and insecurities were rising to the surface. She had always worried that she could not make a difference, that her efforts were too small to matter. But now, seeing him in this vulnerable state, she understood that the very act of being present, of offering steady support, was powerful in ways she had never imagined. "It's been so long," he said, his voice barely audible. "I've tried to fix everything on my own, and I just can't. I keep failing." "You haven't failed," she said firmly. "You've been surviving even when it was hard. That takes courage. And now, you're not alone anymore." For hours, they sat together, speaking in fragments, sometimes in silence, sometimes with words that trembled with fear and hope alike. She encouraged him to breathe, to notice the small victories within his struggles, to remember that progress is not a straight line. She reminded him gently that healing is messy, that it takes time, and that each step, no matter how small, is significant. As the afternoon faded into evening, a sudden rain began to fall. light at first, then heavier, drenching them both. Most people would have rushed for cover, but they stayed, letting the rain wash over them as if it could carry away some of the weight he had been carrying. She held the umbrella loosely, offering it to him, but he shook his head. "It feels freeing," he said quietly, a small smile breaking through his tears. The rain became a symbol, she realized, of the cleansing power of being seen and understood. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside him, and by facing it together, they both discovered a strange kind of strength. A strength born not from control or perfection, but from vulnerability, trust, and connection. Over the following days, the intensity of their conversations continued. There were moments when he relapsed into silence, withdrawing into the shadows of his thoughts, and she learned to wait patiently, never forcing him, but remaining steadfast. There were moments when he shared flashes of hope, dreams he had thought were impossible, and she celebrated with him, reminding him of his resilience. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the park, he turned to her with a question that had haunted him for years. "Do you think I can really change?" he asked, his voice hesitant but searching. "You already are," she said. "Every time you show up, every time you share your truth, every time you face the fear instead of running from it, you are changing. Healing isn't sudden, it's slow, but it's happening." He looked at her then, and she saw a shift in his eyes. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a glimmer of hope, a willingness to believe that he could step into a life that felt more manageable, more meaningful. Yet she also realized that helping him was not easy. There were days when she felt exhausted, when the weight of his pain pressed on her own heart, when she questioned whether she was strong enough to continue. But each time she reminded herself that strength was not the absence of struggle. It was the courage to face it, the ability to be present even when it was hard, the willingness to trust that small actions can have profound effects. One night, after a particularly difficult conversation, she sat alone in her apartment, reflecting on the journey so far. She thought about the moments when he had looked at her with trust, the times when he had allowed himself to be vulnerable, the small signs of progress that had begun to emerge, and she realized something important. Helping him had changed her too. She had discovered a patience and empathy she had not fully acknowledged, a sense of purpose that had been missing in her quiet routines. The next day, she returned to the park, carrying a thermos of warm tea. He was already there, sitting on the bench, staring at the ground as if he was gathering the courage to face the day. She sat beside him, offering the tea with a gentle smile. "For the moments that feel too heavy," she said. He accepted it quietly, taking a small sip, and she could see the subtle change in him. It was not dramatic, but it was there, the recognition that he was not alone, that someone cared enough to share his burdens, to walk with him through the dark moments instead of offering empty advice or rushing him to get better. As they sat together, she realized that the journey was far from over. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, times when the weight felt unbearable, and yet there was also hope, connection, and growth. She understood that her role was not to solve his problems, but to stand with him, to offer steady support, and to remind him and herself that courage is often quiet, patience is powerful, and healing is a journey walked step by step. In that shared silence, in the warmth of the tea and the gentle rain that had started again, they both found a sense of calm. He began to talk about small goals, things he could manage, moments of life he had avoided for fear of failure. She encouraged him gently, celebrating each small step, reminding him that progress, no matter how incremental, was meaningful. And in helping him, she discovered a truth about herself. Strength was not about avoiding pain or controlling every outcome. It was about presence, empathy, patience, and trust. It was about showing up, even when the world felt heavy, and offering care without expecting perfection in return. And she realized that this strength, awakened through helping him, was a part of her that she could carry into every aspect of her life. As the sun set fully, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, not in dramatic victories, but in the small, human moments that mattered most. He had taken steps toward healing, and she had discovered her own courage and resilience along the way. And in that shared journey, they both began to understand the profound truth. That connection, empathy, and presence could transform lives in ways neither of them had imagined when they first met on that quiet park bench. The days that followed felt different for both of them. There was still a shadow of sadness, still the weight of old memories, but something new had started to grow between them, something fragile yet real. It was hope, not the loud kind that promises to erase pain overnight, but the quiet kind that takes root slowly, almost secretly, in the corners of tired hearts. He began to show small signs of change. They were subtle at first. He started arriving a little earlier at the park, his clothes a little neater, his eyes carrying a hint of light. He spoke more often, not only about the past, but about the present, about things he wanted to do and places he wished to see. She noticed these small shifts like they were rays of sunshine breaking through thick clouds. One morning, he brought 2 cups of coffee instead of waiting for her to offer one. It was such a simple gesture, yet it carried meaning. It showed effort, thought, and a willingness to give rather than only receive. She smiled when he handed her the cup, and he laughed softly, a sound she had never heard from him before. It wasn't loud or carefree, but it was genuine, a sound that hinted at healing. They talked about ordinary things that day: music, food, memories from childhood, little moments that people usually overlook. For the first time, their conversation wasn't centered on pain. It was about life itself, about the small joys that make it bearable. She realized that healing didn't come all at once. It came in these simple moments, in laughter, in shared silence, in kindness that expected nothing in return. As weeks turned into a new season, she saw how much he was changing. He had started volunteering at a small shelter nearby. "It feels strange," he told her one afternoon, "helping others when I'm still trying to help myself. But it makes me feel useful again." She smiled, understanding completely. "Maybe that's how healing works," and she said, "Sometimes helping someone else helps us too." Their bond deepened in ways neither had expected. It wasn't romantic. It was something more grounding, an understanding that 2 broken people could hold space for each other's pain without being consumed by it. They talked about progress, setbacks, and what it meant to start over. She encouraged him to take things slowly, reminding him that 1 step forward, even if followed by 2 steps back, was still progress. But it wasn't always easy. There were days when he disappeared again, days when the old heaviness returned. She learned not to take it personally. Healing had its rhythm, its ups and downs, and she trusted that he would return when he was ready, and he always did. Each time he came back, he looked a little stronger, as if the darkness had lost just a little more power over him. One evening, they met as the sun was setting, painting the park in shades of orange and gold. He told her about a letter he had written to someone from his past, a letter of forgiveness, one he didn't intend to send but needed to write for himself. He read parts of it to her, his voice steady but emotional. It wasn't just a letter, it was a release, a way to let go of years of guilt that had kept him trapped. When he finished reading, she reached over and gently took his hand. "That took courage," she said softly. "You're stronger than you think." He shook his head slightly, though a small smile touched his lips. "I don't feel strong," he said. "Strength doesn't always feel like power," she replied. "Sometimes it feels exactly like this, quiet, shaky, uncertain. But it's there. I see it." Those words seemed to stay with him. In the days that followed, she noticed him trying new things. He began painting again, something he had loved years ago but abandoned when life grew too heavy. He showed her one of his sketches, a simple drawing of 2 figures sitting on a park bench under a cloudy sky. It made her smile. It wasn't perfect, but it carried emotion, truth, and connection. Seeing him create again filled her with pride, not because he was suddenly better, but because he was allowing himself to feel alive again. And somewhere in that process, he noticed a change within herself too. She had always seen herself as someone quiet and ordinary, but helping him had awakened something deep inside, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She was more patient now, more present, more aware of the small details that make up a person's world. She had learned to listen without needing to fix, to care without losing herself in someone else's pain. Yet there were still moments when she struggled. There were days she felt drained, questioning whether she was truly helping or just holding on to something that wasn't hers to carry. During those times, she would go for long walks alone, thinking about the first day they met and the progress they had made since then. Each time she realized that despite the exhaustion, she wouldn't change a thing. Helping him had changed her too, teaching her about resilience, empathy, and the quiet power of compassion. One late afternoon, they sat together watching children play nearby. The air was filled with laughter, the kind that made everything else seem lighter. He turned to her and said, "Do you ever wonder why people stay to help others when it's hard?" She thought for a moment before answering. "Because sometimes helping someone else reminds us that life still has meaning," she said. "And sometimes it helps us find the strength we didn't know we had." He nodded slowly. "I think I'm starting to understand that." From that day on, he began taking more steps on his own. He applied for a part-time job at a small store, something simple to start rebuilding his confidence. The day he told her he got the job, his face lit up with a smile that reached his eyes. It was the kind of joy that only comes after long struggle, the kind that feels earned. "I didn't think I'd ever feel useful again," he said. "You were always useful," she replied. "You just forgot for a while." They both laughed, and for a moment everything felt light, effortless, and right. As he grew stronger, their meetings began to change. They still met often, but now their conversations were filled with plans, dreams, and laughter instead of sorrow. He talked about saving up to travel, about learning new skills, about wanting to give back to others who were struggling. She listened proudly, knowing that this transformation was his doing. She had simply been there to remind him he could do it. And as he rebuilt his life, she found herself reflecting on her own. Helping him had shown her what truly mattered: connection, kindness, presence. She realized that she too had been carrying quiet fears of her own, fears of not being enough, of living a life without meaning. But through this journey, she had faced those fears and found a strength that surprised her. One evening, they sat quietly under the soft glow of streetlights. The park was nearly empty, and the air was cool with the first touch of autumn. "You've changed a lot," she said gently. He smiled. "I guess I finally started believing I could." "And you did it," she said. "You kept going even when it was hard." He looked at her with gratitude in his eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you." She shook her head, smiling. "You did it because you were ready. I just reminded you of what was already there." They sat in silence after that, both thinking about the long path that had led them here. The pain, the patience, the small victories that had built something strong and real. She knew the journey wasn't over. Healing never really ends. It just changes form. But she also knew that they had both found something precious: strength born out of compassion and the courage to keep moving forward. As the night deepened and the lights around the park flickered, she felt a deep calm settle in her chest. She realized that sometimes the purpose of our lives isn't found in grand moments, but in the quiet ways we show up for one another, in listening, in caring, in staying when it would be easier to walk away. And in that calm, she understood something she hadn't before. By helping him find his way back to life, she had found her own. She had discovered that strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about being willing to rebuild again and again. No matter how many times life tests you, they said goodbye that evening with a quiet promise to keep going, to keep believing, and to never forget how far they had come. And as she walked home under the fading light, she smiled to herself, feeling lighter than she had in years, knowing that sometimes the act of helping a wounded soul can reveal the strongest parts of our own. Time moved on quietly, as it often does when life begins to heal. The air turned colder, and the trees started to lose their leaves. The park where they used to meet every week now looked different, softer somehow, touched by the calm beauty of early winter. But what hadn't changed was the quiet bond between them, a bond that had been built not from perfection, but from persistence, understanding, and shared moments of truth. She had watched him rebuild his life piece by piece, and it gave her a kind of peace she hadn't known before. He wasn't the same person who had once sat on that bench with eyes full of emptiness. There was steadiness in him now, a quiet strength that didn't shout but simply existed. He spoke with confidence, laughed easily, and walked with a lighter step. And she knew that behind that transformation was his own effort, his choice to keep going even when it hurt. They still met often, but now their meetings were filled with a new kind of energy. Sometimes they'd talk about books or films, sometimes about dreams for the future. Other times they'd just sit in silence, comfortable in the kind of quiet that only two people who truly understand each other can share. One afternoon, as the sun was dipping low and the air smelled faintly of rain, he told her he had decided to move to another city. "There's a job there," he explained, a mix of excitement and hesitation in his voice. It's something I really want to do. It's a chance to start over properly. She listened, her heart heavy but proud. Change was part of healing, and she knew this step meant everything to him. That's wonderful, she said softly. You've worked hard for this. You deserve it. He looked at her for a moment as if searching for something in her expression. I wouldn't have gotten here without you, he said. You stayed when I couldn't even stay with myself. She smiled, though her eyes grew a little misty. You give me too much credit, she said. All I did was remind you of who you were. You did the hard part. He shook his head gently. No, he said. You were the first person who saw me when I felt invisible. That made all the difference. They didn't say much after that. The silence between them was filled with understanding, with gratitude, with unspoken emotions that didn't need words. Sometimes goodbyes aren't about distance, they're about growth. And both of them knew this was one of those moments. A few days later, she helped him pack. His apartment was small and simple, but to him, it represented survival, proof that he had rebuilt something real. As they folded clothes and sorted through old papers, he found the letter he had written months ago, the one he'd never sent. He held it for a long time before placing it carefully inside a small box. I think I'll keep it, he said quietly. Not because I need it anymore, but because it reminds me of how far I've come. She nodded, feeling her chest tighten with emotion. That's a good reason, she said. When the day of his departure came, the sky was gray and a soft drizzle had started to fall. They met one last time at the park, the same bench where their story had begun. It felt like the right place for an ending, though it didn't feel like an ending in her heart. They sat there for a while, watching the rain ripple across puddles. Do you remember the first time we talked? He asked with a small smile. I barely said a word. I remember, she said, smiling back. You looked like the whole world had ended, he laughed quietly. It kind of had, but you helped me find a new one. Her throat tightened and she looked away for a moment, blinking back tears. Promise me one thing, she said softly. Keep choosing yourself, even when it's hard. Especially then, he nodded. I promise. They stood there for a long time before saying goodbye. When he finally walked away, she watched him until he disappeared into the distance. A strange calm filled her. Not sadness exactly, but a deep, quiet gratitude. She had met him when he was broken, and now she was watching him walk into a new life stronger than ever. There was beauty in that kind of ending. After he left, her days felt different. There was a quiet space where he used to be, but she didn't fill it with loneliness. Instead, she filled it with reflection, with small joys, with moments that reminded her of her own growth. She started spending more time with herself, reading, painting, volunteering at the community center. People often came to her for advice, drawn by her calm presence. She didn't think of herself as someone wise, but she had learned something valuable from her journey with him. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in kindness. One evening, while she was helping out at the community center, a young woman approached her. She looked lost, much like he once had. Her eyes carried the same kind of quiet pain, the kind that hides behind polite smiles. They sat down together and the young woman began to talk. Her words came slowly at first, then faster, like a river finally finding its flow. She listened patiently, nodding, letting the young woman's story unfold without judgment. When the girl finished, she said softly, You're not alone. It doesn't feel like it now, but things can get better. Sometimes it just takes one person to remind you that you still matter. The young woman looked at her with teary eyes. Did someone remind you once? She asked. She smiled. Yes, she said. Someone did. That night as she walked home under the streetlights, she thought about how life had come full circle. She had once helped someone find their way, and now she was passing that same strength forward. It felt right, like this was what she was meant to do, not to save others, but to help them find their own light the way he had found his. Months went by, and every now and then she would get a message from him. He wrote about his new job, the small apartment he had decorated himself, the people he had met. He talked about joining an art class, about feeling nervous but excited, about finally feeling like he belonged somewhere again. Each message carried warmth, proof that he was truly living again. She would smile every time she read his updates. She didn't reply right away, choosing instead to take her time to let the joy of his words sink in. When she did write back, her messages were simple but sincere. I'm proud of you, she'd say. Keep going. Keep being kind to yourself. One day a message came that made her pause. It said, "I've been telling someone here about you, about how one act of kindness can change everything." She read those words over and over, feeling tears fill her eyes. It wasn't sadness this time, it was gratitude. She realized that healing doesn't stop with one person. It ripples outward, touching lives in ways we can't always see. She looked around her small apartment at the quiet peace that filled it. There was a framed drawing on her wall, the sketch he had once made of them sitting on that park bench under a cloudy sky. It was a reminder, not of sadness, but of transformation. She smiled at it, whispering softly to herself, "We both made it." As another year passed, she grew stronger in her own ways. She had stopped searching for meaning in big achievements and started finding it in the small, quiet things. Morning walks, shared laughter, the warmth of sunlight through her window. She understood now that her strength had always been there. It had just needed a reason to surface. Helping him had changed her, yes, but it had also shown her something deeper, that compassion wasn't weakness, that giving didn't mean losing, and that even the smallest act of kindness could breathe life back into someone's soul. And though their paths had gone in different directions, she carried his story with her like a gentle echo. Every time she met someone struggling, she would remember that first conversation in the park, the broken voice, the heavy silence, and how even then something inside her had whispered, "Don't walk away." She never did walk away from him or from herself. In the end, their story wasn't about rescue. It was about recognition. It was about two people crossing paths at the exact moment they needed to, teaching each other what it means to be human, to hurt, to heal, and to grow. Years later, when she sat once again on that same park bench, the city around her a little older, the trees a little taller, she thought about him with a quiet smile. Somewhere out there, he was living his life and she was living hers. Different paths, same strength. The world kept moving, but that memory, the one that started with pain and ended with hope, stayed with her. She knew now that life's real beauty isn't in avoiding brokenness, but in finding meaning through it. Because when you help someone find their way back, you often find your own. And in that moment, surrounded by the sound of rustling leaves and distant laughter, she realized the truth she had been living all along. Sometimes, the greatest healing comes not from being saved, but from saving someone else and discovering in the process the quiet, unshakable strength that was inside you all along.